Unit 7 in your textbook is about cognition. Cognition is the thought process. Out of all the units, the chapters that make up your psychology curriculum and are represented in your textbook, the unit on cognition, this chapter, is perhaps the lengthiest. And it is so because it contains in it a wealth of very detailed terms and concepts. This unit itself is broken up into 4 parts. Half of those will deal with memory. This is the first of 2 parts on memory. From there, we'll look at the thought process itself and problem solving. Those units, that portion of the unit is much shorter. But memory, we are defined by our memories. We are the sum total of our memories, whether they're positive or negative or neutral. Some of you can identify with the flaws with memory, and we'll look at this in more detail in the next lesson, where it's not just getting the information in, but then ideally being able to get the information out when the time comes. How often do you study, do you pore over your notes, and then come test time, poof, it's gone. But then maybe the minute you walk out the door, suddenly it comes to you. Memory, it accounts for time and it defines your life. Okay, it enables you to sing the national anthem, to find your way home. You are what you remember. So if some of those memories start to come up blank, how is that person now defined? How do they see themselves? Are they still the same person? Your memory is your mind's storehouse. It is the reservoir of all that you have learned. Muscle memories, declarative memories, facts, random trivia, all of that. And while this is a little weird, supposedly this is the man that everybody has seen in their dreams, supposedly. Whether or not he's made guest appearances in your dream is debatable, but now that you've seen him, he may make a guest appearance tonight. You're welcome. All right, it is the basis of knowing your friends, your neighbors, the English language, the national anthem, and even yourself. If it was non-existent, everyone would be a stranger to you. Every language foreign, every task new, even you yourself would be a stranger. And if you remember, I've mentioned this several times, we know quite a bit about what memory is and does, largely because of Henry Molaison, HM, hippocampus removed. And while he knew who he was, he did not know that he was a 60, 70, 80-year-old man while he was in protective custody in those latter years of his life. In his mind, he was still a 20-something-year-old that happened to go under the knife because of seizures. They had to keep reflective surfaces away from him because it would be very anxiety-inducing for him. Supposedly, Malcolm in the Middle, there's a great swab, and you can look this up, but a good chunk of his past he has no recollection of. How in the world is that possible? And we'll look at some of the issues involving memory as we progress through this unit. This is a question connected with an earlier unit. Now, if I were to ask you this, and ideally I would have you in the room and I could pitch this question and see who would answer, but when it's phrased like this, students have issues with it. Okay, you either know it or you don't. So I'm asking for a particular type of memory, largely of recognition or recall. This is much more difficult than when it's posed like this. Okay, when it's like this, okay, well, yeah, maybe I know what activation synthesis is. All right, I'll just look for what's familiar. All right, when it's just like this, okay, again, you either know it or you don't. This is largely why students typically like multiple choice. The answer's there. You just have to weed out what's good from what's bad. And of course, the answer to this would be D. Okay, if you know even a little bit, a hint of what the activation synthesis model is, you can kind of weed out, again, you can knock out what you know it's not. Okay, you don't have to know the whole thing, you pick up, you find a few breadcrumbs and you're like, there it is, I got it. And this is where mnemonics, why do mnemonics work? Why are they helpful? And of course the mnemonics for your 4 brain lobes, frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal, FPOT. Okay, and other mnemonics. Okay, generally the ones that don't make any sense, the ones that are odd and stand out, those are the ones that are most memorable. All right, Amy the Emo, Pons with a few extra Z's at the end. If there's a hippo on campus, you're probably going to remember it. Every good boy does fine. Roy G. Biv for the for the colors in the spectrum. Never eat soggy wheat for your ordinal directions. From Unit 3, sensory afferent, motor efferent. It spells out same. And of course, if there's a hippo on campus, you're definitely going to remember it. And there's a reason why these things work. And those are the nuances of memory that we're going to look at. In many respects, people look at or think of a human memory kind of like a flash drive, some sort of recorder. And it is, but it's more than that. It is arguably the most powerful supercomputer that exists. But it's not without its flaws. It's not also without its hacks. All right, but memory, language, and thought all work together in a process known as cognition. Memory is a system that encodes, stores, and retrieves information. So ideally, with this process, it has to be encoded, broken down into something that the brain can understand, stored, and then you get it out when you need it. Ideally, in a perfect world. Okay, memory is a process designed to encode, store, and retrieve. It works very closely with perception, bringing or placing sensory input into meaningful patterns. And this is where we would look back and review some of the stuff from Unit 4, because it's very much connected with this. Your brain, if you recall from Unit 4, takes in things secondhand. It has to be broken down first into a neurological language your brain gets. Cognitive psychologists refer to this as the information processing model, and that's already typed in for you at the bottom. Okay, very much an assembly line when it works like it should. All right, transduction, again, these are coded words and things from earlier units. Everything must be transduced for your brain to get the message. Okay, we looked at top-down and bottom-up processing in Unit 4. Bottom-up processing would be sight, skin color, man, the fact that he's an actor and his name. Okay, if you would get the kind of sadistic punchline behind this, okay, that would be top-down processing. It would be a schema, a learning-based inference, because you have information and you're taking that and using new information, or using that to gauge new information you bring in. Similar to, again, with the placement of the books there, Hard Fall from Grace with Bill Cosby. Or Matt Lauer from a couple years ago. Okay, seen as a very distinguished anchorman and journalist, and then information comes to light and suddenly no longer seen the same way. Or from a couple years ago, our own Governor Northam. Okay, pictures surface, yearbook photos from when he was in college. People started to look at him quite different. And it's interesting. Kobe, now certainly with his passing not too long ago, there were some issues earlier on in his life that, now people don't even pay any attention to. Okay, only focusing on the positive, the good. But I can assure you there was an earlier time in his career where, media attention was less than favorable. All right, but the stages. And again, all of this is connected with memory, because these are the things, media perception greatly influences and impacts how we take in things, how we remember things. All right, well, the stages of memory. Encoding, some of this is already filled in. Letter B, by the way, on your set of notes, stimulus. B would be transduction. Encoding, storage would then be the USB drive, and retrieval, getting the information out. That is the 3-part process. encoding, storage, and retrieval. All right, and right below this, okay, so with encoding, you've got semantic, you've got acoustic, and you have visual. Now, semantic comes up a lot in this unit, and the word itself has a different definition almost in every single context. Semantic means meaning. Acoustic, hearing, and visual is sight. Okay, now of the three, and you might say, well, I'm more of a visual person. If I see it, I got it. I'm more auditory. If I hear it, I got it. Don't really know what this word means in full context, so not so much so. Now, of the three, and we'll look at an experiment here in a second connected with it, of the three, certainly if you combine multiple modalities, your recall is better. But anytime you personally make things meaningful, it is meaningful for you, you will remember it. More than likely, if you were to make like a top 10 list of things from last year, or for that matter, the last decade that stick out, it's probably things that have had a personal emotional impact on you. Okay, there may have been some firsts on that list, driver's license, day of high school or middle school, first job, maybe some tragedies, maybe some triumphs, maybe some sorrows if there was a passing of somebody very meaningful. Okay, anytime things are meaningful for you or you purposely try to find meaning in it, it will be more memorable. All right, well then storage. Sensory memory, holding material over time, sensory memory, working memory, and long-term memory, and then retrieval, getting the information out. Again, it's a process, like an assembly line. Okay, if everything goes as it's supposed to, you learned it, you focused on it, you mentally digest it, and test time, boom, I got it. Make it rain. All right, but types of encoding, okay, semantic, acoustic, and visual. Of the three, again, semantic seemed to supersede the other two, because anytime things are much more meaningful for you, the recall will be better. And this is part of the reason why visual memory is lacking. Because, a lot of us are visual. We live in a very visual world. Okay, we're bombarded with images 24/7. Okay, some would even argue, image is everything. And you've seen this before. Which one is the real penny? You've seen millions upon millions of pennies perhaps in your lifetime. But were you really looking? Okay, and of course, the real one was penny A. And even myself, okay, before I activated that, I really wasn't sure. Because there's a couple others that look pretty convincing as well. And, optical illusions oftentimes make really good use of issues in our visual system. If you're like me and you're looking at this picture, you may be thinking, why in the world is there a giant face right here in the middle of this? It's not a face. That's a little boy. That's his face right there. That's his cap or his bonnet, hat of some kind, stocking that he's wearing. That's his shirt, his elbow, his arm. He's sitting on his father's lap. Okay, but I'll be honest with you. Every time I see this, I see the face first. And you may look at this and be like, whoa, what in the world's going on with this guy? Okay, what's his problem? Okay, not see that coming. Okay, however, if it's inverted, okay, if you're thinking this is a swastika, it is not. When it's like this in this direction, it means harmony, peace. When it's in the other direction, then it would be the Nazi symbol, the swastika. And at first glance, what's wrong with this picture? And it may take you a second, but if you look at the face, it is the exact same face on all of them. The hairstyle's different. Let's see. Visual memory. Visual memory has real-world consequences. Now, I'd have to look this up for the details because I'm a little foggy on it right now. But as this story went, Richard Jones, side profile here. Here he is at the bottom, facing front. Ricky Amos, side profile, facing forward. Now, their side profile is very, very similar. Okay, and they look a lot alike head on, depending on what you're looking at. They do look a lot alike. Their side profiles are amazingly similar. And one of the two spent time in prison for a crime he did not commit. Apparently, the alibi didn't quite match up, but innocent guy spent time in prison for a crime he did not commit. Somebody pointed him out. Both had track records. Both had a record. He wasn't. One of the two wasn't anywhere at the scene. But in the heat of a moment, if it was a robbery, if it was some sort of maybe carjacking or something like that, how good of a view would you have had of the perpetrator? Okay, there's certain details you would focus on, and if there's a lineup and the real person isn't there, you generally gravitate towards who is there. All right, let's see. Storage. That's sensory memory. All right, Sperling's experiment at the bottom. This goes along with sensory memory. Sensory memory is perhaps the most fleeting. Now, some of this information is already filled out for you, but with sensory memory on your notes, it holds sensory input, smell and taste, okay, from all of your senses. It doesn't last very long. Okay, in fact, from an earlier unit, Unit 6, if it is unchanging, your brain moves on to something else. Sensory adaptation, habituation. Its function, it's a screener, it's a funnel. Okay, because your brain is taking in sensory input all the time. Input that you're conscious of, but even more often than not, information that you're not conscious of. And if it's important, your brain is going to sound the alarm. If it's not, it moves on to something else. The neurological basis, sensory pathways, transduction. So this would be where your sense of smell. Where in the brain will your sense of smell go? Where will taste go? Where will touch go? And so on. All right, now Sperling's experiment, this is already typed in. Better recall if information is received through multiple sensory pathways. Okay, so this would be where if you are hearing it as well as seeing it, you're going to remember better. Okay, this would be where if you get to make it, but then you get to taste it as well. Okay, maybe it's that kind of classroom activity. Okay, but anytime you're able to utilize more than one sensory pathway, you're using more of the brain, hence it will be longer lasting. Okay, so you take the list of brain parts that you have to memorize and you turn it into a song and you're singing it out loud and you're clapping your hands as you do it. Okay, you're touching upon multiple sensory pathways. All right, but what Sperling noticed, okay, he would flash letters up on the screen very quickly. And the recall of these letters was not very good. In fact, there were a lot of mistakes. And you can kind of see where mistakes would be if these rows horizontally were flashed up very quickly. Did I see a Z or was that a 2? Did I see a Q or was that an O or a 0? Okay, was that a B or was that an 8? Mistakes would be made. But he paired it up with a signal. Okay, so hopefully this doesn't hurt the audio on this too much. So maybe, and then the first row, and then second row, and then the recall became nearly flawless. Anytime you use more than one sensory pathway, the recall will be better. All right, and this is a review This is a review of where the sensory information goes, because remember, it has to be transduced. Olfactory is your sense of smell, and it is ultimately going to go to the frontal lobe. But before it makes it there, remember, it goes through the limbic area first. Your sense of smell is perhaps the most emotional and memorable of all of your senses. How many times you smell something, you hear somebody say, "Ah, that smells like." It's usually not positive. All right, iconic. Iconic is sight. It's going to go to the occipital lobe. Echoic, acoustic, is going to go to the temporal lobe, but it's hearing. Tactile, touch, and taste. Okay, tactile is touch. It's going to go to the parietal lobe. And gustatory, gustation, your sense of taste, will also ultimately go to the parietal lobe. Okay. From there, short-term memory becomes working memory. I'm sorry, sensory memory becomes short-term or working memory, aka short-term memory, working memory. Its purpose, it connects with long-term memory, maybe. Length, 20 to 30 seconds. Short-term memory is not very long. This would be where somebody's like, okay, let me give you this phone number real quick. And you can't memorize it, but you'll do things to hold on to it a little longer. All right, amount, only about 7 items. That's the average. Some people can hold a little more, some a little less. Magic number 7. All right, well, not much to work with. Creativity is a must. Chunking is 1. Chunking is where you put things into meaningful groups. All right, so a phone number, 776-9728. Okay, maybe you would break it up into pairs. 7797 or 97. You break it up into groups, meaningful patterns. Rehearsal, and this you hear people do more often than not. They repeat it over and over again. So you've got the number, you need to put it in your phone, and maybe you're saying it over and over again. 8675309, 8675309. Levels of processing also goes along with this. Meaning makes things more memorable. That would take what's random, because keep in mind, short-term memory, you learn a lot of things in a typical classroom. Okay, but how much of that is going to make it to long-term memory? How much of that are you going to remember 10, 15, 20 years from now? The meaningful stuff will stick, for there's oftentimes an emotional piece behind it. Its function. Function of short-term memory is that it's going to connect with long-term memory. It's the next in the line of the assembly, the assembly of your memory. Neurological basis, the hippocampus. And we know this because of a gentleman we've talked about a lot who did not have it. It was lesioned out of his brain. So if you look at these arrows on this set of notes, okay, basically the bridge was blown. Okay, this, I mean, if it's an assembly line, if it's piece after piece making a brand new long-term memory, well, no hippocampus, he couldn't do that. Okay, and what this is showing, if you don't use information, you lose it very quickly. Chunking, okay, some of you might get the movie reference. Patterns of meaningful information. So 1492, 1776, 1812, 1941. It's more than 7. Okay, remember 7 is the magic number with short-term memory. But 1492, 1776, War of 1812, a year that will live in infamy. Okay, now these have meaning. In fact, you could add a few more to it. All right, long-term memory. Okay, the arrow going back and forth, top and bottom up processing schemas and perceptual set, because it is the sum total information that is in your brain. Everything that you learned is in there. And the arrows are going back and forth because certainly, ideally, you learn something new, it's staying there, but you're also using that to draw new information in. It holds everything. Its length is unlimited. Nobody has maxed out their long-term memory. Even if you can't remember, there's probably still traces of it. Sometimes little shards of older memories sometimes come to light, where you're like, I know this, I've heard this. You're kind of fuzzy, hazy on the details. Its function, long-term storage, neurological basis. Okay, with the cerebral cortex, those are the 4 lobes. Memories are stored all throughout the brain. Okay, as the senses send it to its correct spot, and if it's long-lasting, it's stored all throughout the brain. All right, now long-term memory has a further breakdown, okay, in terms of what it does and the brain parts that are involved. Okay, so long-term memory, declarative and procedural. You've got semantic, episodic, and such. All right, semantic memory, and I'm thinking what's being recorded, you may not be able to see this at the bottom. I will give that to you. I'll say it out loud. But long-term memory, you've got declarative memories. You've got semantic and episodic. Semantic memories would be facts and general knowledge. Okay, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Spirit of 1776, 1941, a year that will live in infamy. All that stuff is just general knowledge. Episodic memories are personal memories. Okay, the episodes of your life. Now, the brain part responsible for this happening would be the hippocampus. And we know this because H.M., who had his removed, could not learn new semantic memories. He could not establish new episodic memories. Okay, his personal experiences after he lost his hippocampus, he couldn't remember them. All right, if you were to tell him, hey, H.M., or ask him, H.M., who's the President of the United States? Okay, he passed away, I think, in 2007, 2008. He would probably say the president is Harry Truman or Dwight D. Eisenhower, whenever it was he had his hippocampus removed. Okay, not Barack Obama, president-elect, and not George W. Bush on his way out. Okay, those would be semantic memories, and you can tell him, but in a minute or two he'd forget. All right, well, procedural memories, on the other hand, these are muscle memories. And these are established in another part of the brain. All right, so for declarative memories, semantic and episodic, the hippocampus is responsible. Oh, well, look at that, moving that down. Hopefully you're able to see it, maybe. For the procedural memories, that is the cerebellum. The cerebellum is responsible for that. Now, H.M., to his credit, he could not remember new declarative memories. This was off the books for him. This wasn't happening. He could learn new muscle memories, and they did put him to the test with this. He could learn maybe how to play a musical instrument. He could do that, okay, but he wouldn't know how he learned it. Maybe he practiced on it every single day. Like, maybe you showed him a flute and be like, what's this? I've never seen this before. But then he starts playing it like a champ. He could learn new muscle memories. And speaking of Mr. H.M., he gets a lot of press coverage in this class. Really, he does. Because a lot of what we know about memory comes from this guy. But as we've looked at before and then adding a little bit to it, he had his hippocampus removed. You might remember it was done so because of seizures. He developed anterior grade amnesia. Now, there are 2 different forms of amnesia that are mentioned that one could develop. Anterior grade and retrograde. Okay, for him, he could remember the past. He couldn't remember new stuff. So that was the kind of amnesia he had. He couldn't remember new memories. if you listening to this, if he were alive and you introduced yourself, hi, my name is blah, 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 all right, within a minute, he'd forget. Okay? Now, if he knew you before the surgery, okay, he knew you. Okay? He knew exactly who you, if he knew you before the surgery. But after the surgery, no new declarative memories. Retrograde amnesia, though, is when you cannot remember old. You can't recall old memories. In HM, his situation, this did not apply to him. This you oftentimes see in movies, though, where the person gets hit in the back of the head and then they can't remember. All right. The next portion of this lesson, we'll look at retrieval cues, and then we'll look at why we oftentimes forget.